I posted on Facebook on Friday afternoon that we were doing the film The Shack this week. And immediately my Facebook Messenger inbox started getting all kinds of messages from people who were telling me that this movie or the book that came out before the movie, that it had had a profound impact on their lives. So I thought I'd share a couple of those messages with you this morning. A friend of mine wrote me, haven't seen her in 15 years. She said, my dad died in 2011. The circumstances were crappy. I saw him and said goodnight, love you, see you in the morning, and he stopped breathing for no reason that night. I carried that until I saw The Shack. I was so angry with the circumstances and honestly with God. I needed something to get me back on path, and this movie was just the thing. My dad wasn't the best parent, but the takeaway was my anger, needing to blame, unwilling to forgive the circumstances of his death. I wanted someone to say to me, Janie, I messed this up and I'm sorry. We know there's no reasoning behind medical sometimes, so I just blamed God. How could you take my dad from our lives? We have these babies. My sister was going to get married. It was all just so wrong. Bad things happen to good people, but not this bad. So unfair. I slipped through the cracks and God left me when I needed him. I struggled for 5 years to find my way back. Another person wrote me, she said, I was in a serious car accident a year ago last night and had lost my great-grandma in October of 2015, and I was in the mindset of how could God let these things happen? The Shack really helped me see the whole picture and how loving God is. Another friend of mine wrote me yesterday afternoon, and he said that movie, it hit every step of the process. The anger, the blame, the doubting of God, wondering why God would allow it. It even touched on the part that I'm struggling with most and the thing that is keeping me from true happiness, and that is forgiving. So I want you to take a moment and think about a time in your life when you felt stuck. Take a moment and think about a time in your life when you came face to face with tragedy. And what did it feel like? Do you remember it? How'd you respond? And I get it for some of you, maybe you're there right now. So it's not too difficult to imagine. And see, tragedy, it has this way of coming along and turning our lives upside down and getting us stuck in that exact moment, in the exact moment where that thing happened, unable to move forward. It has a way of coming along and making us ask the biggest questions about the nature of God. Questions like, God, who are you? Where were you? Why weren't you there? And see, what I've learned along the way is during these moments, you're not really looking for answers. I mean, you're certainly not looking for pat answers to try to come along and fix everything and make it all better. You're asking the deepest questions you know because your heart is aching. It feels like you can't breathe. Joy has been taken from you. So I just want to take a moment and say to you, if you are facing tragedy, if you are asking those questions now, and you've been told somewhere along your journey by people you respect or by some religious leaders, if you've been told that you shouldn't be asking these kinds of questions, or if you've been told things like, well, you just got to trust because God has a plan for it all, like you're some sort of pawn to be played with, or if you've been told not to have doubt, you just got to have faith, don't buy it. Keep going. Keep asking your biggest questions. Keep tearing open your rib cage. Keep expressing those doubts because it's our questions and our doubts that help us put the faith back together after the whole thing falls apart. Our questions and our doubts Those are the things that develop a relationship with God, that bring us into relationships. So keep going. Keep going. I want to show you a movie clip. It is the scene where Mac encounters God and has a conversation with God in the kitchen. Take a look. Where'd you get stuck? And what's it like to be unstuck? And so what I want to do for the next few moments is look at these three short stories called parables, and they're found in Luke's Gospel, chapter 15. 3 stories told by Jesus. And I want to look at these stories because I'm reminded that sometimes answers are just inadequate. And stories can be really powerful. So 3 short stories told by Jesus. Luke chapter 15, the story of a lost sheep, lost coin, then a lost son. And before Jesus launches into this story, and by the way, Luke, the author of Luke's Gospel at least, comes along and arranges these stories in a very particular way to connect them together. But before Jesus launches into this first story, we're given 2 verses, and they serve as context to help us interpret and see what exactly is happening in these stories. So those 2 first verses read like this. All the tax collectors and sinners were gathering around Jesus to listen to him. The Pharisees and legal experts were grumbling, saying, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Now, do you ever notice when you're reading through the Gospels, do you notice how hungry Jesus appears to be? Because he is always eating. He is always found at the table with people, the sinners. Right? And we have to understand, for these stories to make sense, we have to understand how much of a political act this is. And I say it's political because in this time, in this day, there was a religious establishment. There were religious leaders. And you've heard me say this 100 times, but they were telling the people who was clean and who was unclean, who's in, who's out, who's worthy, who's unworthy. Now, we're also in the first century Jewish world, the world of Jesus, and these people have been conquered by military superpower after military superpower, and it keeps happening. And the thing is, they believe their God is the most powerful God above all the other gods. So their question is, God, why is this still happening? Why aren't you protecting us? Why are you letting this happen? Now, if those are the questions, what do you think the religious leaders respond with? Of course this is happening. Of course you're getting conquered and stepped on, and of course you're suffering. Of course tragedy is coming your way because there are people in our midst who keep sinning. There are people in our midst who keep going against God's commandments. The sinners, the tax collectors, the prostitutes, you name the category. It's their fault. They're why this is happening. And do you see the implications of that today? How did the religious leaders respond? They're the problem. They're the problem. And by the way, if you want to read a great book on how eating and meals functioned in the first century Jewish world, there is a terrific book. It's called In the Beginning Was the Meal by a biblical scholar named Hal Tosick, and I highly recommend it. It will open your eyes in all sorts of new ways to eating. Jesus was always eating with sinners. Do you see what a radical act this is? Because essentially what Jesus was saying to them is, you're okay. You're not the problem. So the first story, the lost sheep. And by the way, there are some professions that were considered grossly unclean, and no religious leaders would ever handle sheep. Who is Jesus talking to? The religious leaders, the establishment. How does he open the story? It's kind of funny because it's so offensive. Here's how he opens. Suppose someone among you had 100 sheep and lost one of them. Story goes on. Wouldn't he leave the other 99 in the pasture and search for the last one until he finds it? And when he finds it, he is thrilled and places it on his shoulders. When he arrives home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, "Celebrate with me because I've found my lost sheep." I mean, it's a pretty simple story, right? The sheep has to be carried back because when sheep get lost, apparently they just kind of freeze because they don't know what to do. So the owner has to come along and literally pick up the sheep, put it on its shoulders, and carry it home. When you're reading these stories, be reminded the stories are always about rescuing, restoring, and returning. Second story, the story of the coin. Jesus continues, and by the way, these are back-to-back-to-back parables. Or what woman, if she owns 10 silver coins and loses one of them, won't light a lamp or sweep the house, searching her home carefully until she finds it? When she finds it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, "Celebrate with me, because I've found my lost coin." Another pretty simple story, right? Celebrating and rejoicing over that which is found. And then you get the third story, a story about a father and his two sons. And in this story, the younger son comes to the father and says, "Dad, I want my share of the inheritance." And you get how offensive this is, right? I mean, in other words, the youngest son comes to his father and says, "Dad, I wish you were dead so I could have my money." And so the father gives him the money. And we're told in the story that he goes off into this distant land where he squanders everything, squanders every penny. He finally hires himself out to work with the pigs. By the way, another unclean profession. Religious leaders would never handle the pigs. And things get so bad, we're told in the story. If we can have that, there it is. "I will get up and go to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Take me on as one of your hired hands.' So he got up and went to his father." And do y'all remember what happens next? The father is sitting in the living room, I'm imagining, and he starts looking out the window, and he sees his son coming down the dirt road in the distance. And so the father swings open the front door and runs to the end of the driveway and gives his son a big bear hug and welcomes him with compassion. And then the father starts yelling back to the house, "Quick, someone get a robe. My boy's home, get a robe. Get the new sandals too. Or bring the ring. He needs a ring on his finger. Or when someone needs to run up to the market and get the fattened calf because we are going to celebrate." Why are they going to celebrate? Next verse. "Because this son of mine was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and is found." And they began to celebrate. Now, the truth is, the story could stop right there and it would be in perfect alignment with the first two stories. But there's a bit of a plot twist in this story, isn't there? Because the older son, he's off in the fields working. And he starts hearing all this commotion. In fact, the text tells us he's hearing the singing and the dancing. So he walks back home, he gets onto the porch, and he sees one of the servants, and he says to the servants, "What is happening here?" And the servant says, "Oh my goodness, you haven't heard, have you? Your brother, your little brother, is home. He came home last night. Yeah, we didn't even know if he was still alive, but he's here, so we're celebrating." How does the older brother respond? "Then the older son was furious and didn't want to enter in, but his father came out and begged him. He answered his father, 'Look, I've served you all these years and I've never disobeyed your instruction. But when this son of yours returned, after gobbling up your estate on prostitutes, you slaughtered the fattened calf for him?' Then his father said, 'Son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours.'" In other words, son, You have been at the party the whole time and haven't even realized it. And isn't it interesting? Because both sons in the story, just like the religious leaders, the way they look at God, the sons look at the father in the story as one who is keeping score. That the father's love is determined by points. Did you do enough? Did you not do enough? That if they wander off and create distance, then there must be some sort of punishment upon their return. Or if they do good and obey all the instructions, then of course at the end there must be something in it for me. How does the God figure respond? And if you haven't caught on by now, the father in the story is the God figure. How does he respond? Oh, I get it. You thought all that bad stuff you did, you thought I was deducting points. You thought there was punishment waiting for you when you got back home. My son, you are home. Let's celebrate. I mean, how does the father respond? Oh, I get it. Oh, I get it. You thought all that good stuff you were doing, you thought it was earning you something. You thought there was something in it for you at the end. My son, don't you get it? I have loved you the whole time. Look around you. All I have is yours, and you've been here the whole time. What do these three stories have in common? What do they have in common? They all rejoice over something that was lost being found. They all rejoice over something that was lost being recovered and restored. And they all rejoice over something that was lost coming home to where it belonged the whole time. And do you see why we need these stories? Because tragedy comes along, and it has a way of making you feel lost. It has a way of making you feel like you have zero sense of belonging. And for lots of reasons, you think you've become so distant from God. There's a huge barrier now. And you can imagine how the religious leaders would respond to you. Yeah, of course this bad stuff is happening to you. Of course tragedy is coming your way because you did something or they did something, and now God is against you and God is against us. And can't you hear God responding? No. Don't buy it. Don't buy it. My work is always about something that was lost coming home to where it belonged the whole time. My brothers and sisters, are you getting it? You have belonged the whole time. And if you've experienced, or if you are experiencing overwhelming pain and distance, it is not because God is against you. God is the one who says, you have belonged the whole time. Look around, because everything I have is yours. Rescuing, restoring, and returning things to their proper place. These are the things that give these stories energy, and it's what moves them forward. And by the way, what did the sheep do? Nothing. The sheep was carried home. What did the coin do? Nothing. I mean, what can a coin do? The coin was just found and returned to its proper place. What did the son do? Yeah, the son returned, but only under the assumption that he would never be welcomed in and all he could be is a slave. What did he do to earn the party? Nothing. And do you see how it's nothingness? It is the nothingness that drives these stories. And you know what nothingness is about, don't you? Nothingness is about grace. Grace. You don't earn it. You can't get enough points to get it, because grace is always a free gift. It's a free gift, it's never earned. And if it's not free, then it's not grace. And if it's not grace, then it's not the gospel of Jesus Christ, it's something else. And grace is always insistent on your belonging. And see, the truth is, tragedy has a way of coming along. And what we do in those moments, we start to hold on to life even tighter, and we tighten that grasp. And we begin to lose that sense of belonging. And I get it. In those moments of tragedy, your impulse tells you, man, I just want answers. Just tell me why it happened, God. Just tell me why. God, just tell me where you were. Why weren't you there? You abandoned her or him or them or me. Where were you? And even if God were the kind of God who could just all of a sudden lay out answers, would it ever really be enough? Would those answers ever really satisfy your pain? Oh, here's why it happened. I mean, come on. And as Jesus was sitting with the sinners, eating a meal with them, and then he's challenged by the religious leaders, notice he doesn't launch into Theology 101. No, he starts telling simple stories about being lost and being found. Simple stories about returning home. Simple stories about grace. Because in times of tragedy, grace will always be better than answers. It is grace, not answers, that get us unstuck. Check out the movie clip. If you have pain that is robbing you of joy, that is crippling your capacity to love, then my friend, you're stuck. And don't get me wrong, there is a place and a time to be angry. There is a time to yell and scream at God and to curse God and to have it out. I've become a professional in that area. I mean, get it out. And there's also a time to let go.